Thank you everybody for joining us. This is our session on personal branding and skills. My name is Jess. I work in the international relations team at TC Global, and I'll be the host alongside my great panel. So on my panel, I have Vonnie. Vonnie is a content strategist and web content team lead at the University of Stirling in Scotland, but also was the head of digital at a Scottish government agency, a digital specialist for the BBC, and has a background in a background in journalism. She herself has amassed quite a large following on Twitter and Instagram based a lot on her work. So thank you so much for joining us, Vonnie.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And then we have Gerd as well, Gerd Sahampal, a menswear and lifestyle blogger and photographer with over 24,000 followers on Instagram and other platforms. He works closely with branding to create digital content and bring to an audience which appreciates craftsmanship, storytelling, and traveling off the beaten track, which I think is great. So thank you, Gerd.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to dive right in with the first question because we've got 40 minutes and I think there's a lot to discuss during this time. So if I aim this one to you first, Vonnie, what is a personal brand and how do you establish it?
So I think it's really important that people get out of the mindset of thinking of personal brand as a particular platform. It's not a platform, it's not a polished feed, it's not a tool. Sure, these things all support your brand, but that's not your brand. Your brand is what you're known for. It's what you believe in. It's what you do and how you create value for others. And it's definitely not a tool. It's something that is in you already that you have to bring to the surface through intentional work to find out what you're really good at, what your niche is, and what value you can bring to your audience. And then once you do that work, your personal brand will emerge from that.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing, right? Trying to find your niche. I mean, guys, you have any advice on someone trying to figure out what they should base their personal brand on? And Vonnie, you can jump in after that.
Yeah, I think you need to really play on your strengths, right? And something that you're really passionate about. And I think it needs to always be based around, it's got to be based around your personality. You need to kind of weed out those things that make you and your strong points. And we all have them, right? Growing up, we've all had these threads which run through of what makes us tick, right? So it is a play on your motivation, because in terms of, adding to what Vonnie mentioned about the value you add, and the only way you're going to really add that is to really truly be yourself. You do see a lot of people go down the journey of personal branding and showcasing a side to themselves, which isn't truly them, but it's perceived that society would prefer that as a personal branding. You really need to just, almost look within to decide what makes you tick, what makes you, and then really pulling those strong suits out, and then having people see those strong suits. And I think, yes, you need to improve on your weaknesses, but there needs to be an underlying core of who you are. From a personal perspective, that really draws the people towards you.
Yeah, anything to add to that, Vonnie?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would maybe suggest an exercise for people who are trying to establish what their niche is. So you could draw a Venn diagram. You could have one circle where you think about what you love, and then you draw another circle, and that's what motivates you. And then you draw another circle as what you're really good at, what fires you up, and what you're passionate about. And then in the middle of that sweet spot, that's your niche, and that's what you need to go after. It's what you love, what motivates you, because that's the thing that's going to get you to continue to create and continue to put the work in. You have to think about that, not just what you love and what you're excited about today, is what your core motivation is and what you're good at, what your audience wants, that's the other circle, and then that's where you'll create value, is around that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good exercise for people to actually consider. And based on that, actually, just to touch back on personal brand and how to build it and what it is, I think people sometimes associate it with an influencer from social media world, right? But do you think a personal brand should be beyond that, of someone wanting to be famous on TikTok, right? Like, what is the purpose of a personal brand, essentially? Vonnie, you want to hit that one first?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that people see personal brand as platform agnostic and tool agnostic. because tools aren't going to be around forever. You have to be able to pivot, so you have to get the under the bonnet thinking right. I think personal brand is, when you kind of step back from it, it's what do you want to be remembered for? You know, that is far more that than any particular tool. So, you know, you need to think about, yeah, what value you want to give to the world, what tools, what platforms, yeah, but what are the values that define you? And again, coming back to sort of an exercise, thinking about maybe the 3 values that you have, and write them down, and that will inform what you do. It's you know, TikTok is maybe really, really important right now for lots of people. Not for me, I'm too old for it. I don't know how it works. Whereas you have to think longer term than that. You're thinking about what you can continue to create that is agnostic of any platform, that will travel with you throughout your life, because it's your legacy. It's not a really nice curated grid. It's not your Instagram aesthetic. It's the things that you do that you'll be remembered for.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, I think personal branding just generally is about, you know, is walking and talking that lifestyle, right? In terms of personal branding isn't just or to one platform or to one company. You know, it's a walk of life. Like you need to be authentic. You need to be that person in your community. You know, in your relationships. Personal branding, it happens even in, like, your family should know kind of what you're all about. Your friends should know what you're all about, and that really should flow through to all types of work. It's not necessarily platform driven, because, you know, if you go from platform driven, you're always going to be setting up to be heavily reliant on a specific platform. I think you really need to, you know, live, breathe this branding, or who you think, as Ronnie mentioned, about these 3 values or these 3 things that really pull you out to be who you are. And of course, like, personal branding it's definitely a journey, right? It's not a destination. I think that's what I would say, because I've evolved so much over time, and things that I didn't necessarily know, which was what personal branding. But in that evolution, I've realized that some of the points that was there 5-6 years ago is still, you know, very much prominent in terms of the core of that personal branding. It's essentially just sharpening that personal branding. It's essentially just really tweaking things to really understand where you're adding value, and putting that with your hobbies and what you do. And it really drives that, right? So it's all driven by just how you wake up, how you live your life, basically, not just how you want to kind of present yourself on Instagram or TikTok, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think of it more as an excavation of who you really are, because the thing is, if you try to adopt wholesale what someone else is doing, or it becomes very surface level, it's difficult to keep that up. And when you build a personal brand, you will have face-to-face interactions. People want to meet you, they want to talk to you, they'll want you to represent yourself at events. And very quickly, it becomes apparent that people whose personal brand is surface level, that it's just something that they have curated or put together. When it becomes a reflection of who you are, your motivations, your values, your passions, it shines out of you. And it creates what is the magic ingredient for all of this, which is authenticity, because that's what people want more than anything else. They don't want just something that looks like everything else. They want to see what makes you you. And when you understand that and can promote it, then that's like the secret sauce. That's going to make everything far easier to relate to for other people as well, and more memorable.
Yeah, I think that's actually really reflective of something Simon Sinek has written in Starting With Why, and he says that it's you have to start with the lifestyle, right? So someone might pick a Dell computer, and someone might look at an Apple computer, and they'll buy the Apple because they bought into that lifestyle around Apple. Whereas Dell is possibly a better computer, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't have the lifestyle that you associate with. Okay, guys doesn't agree. He's clearly an iPhone guy. But it doesn't really associate with that. And they say that he clearly says that authenticity is the hardest thing to teach, but it's also the key thing in being able to establish your why, and why would someone want to associate with you. So it's interesting that you're both quite prominent in terms of the influencer field, but how do you manage that? I mean, is this your full-time job, and how did you get started into this? So, going to go first?
Okay. Yeah, so I started 6 years ago, so quite some time in terms of with my menswear blog. Initially started on Instagram, just as a fun thing to do, really. I bought a new camera, went out with some friends and some family, and just started to do outfits. And it sounds weird, but it was literally just changing in the middle of the street and putting on a different look and just shooting it. And then slowly it started, people started following me and like, oh, what's this guy up to? And then I moved to New York, and that's really where it developed further. It was, New York is a place where it's very much more networky, and we talk about personal branding, and that's really where, I'll be honest with you, that's probably where I got caught on the back foot with presenting a personal branding, because in New York, people buy people, and that it is so important there. And then, slowly I started to meet brands, I started to work with prominent photographers, and then it comes to the power of association. People associate you with a certain type of peoples, and from there, they expanded. And obviously, when you start working with brands, people think it's all obviously amazing. But that's how I started, and it's obviously developed a lot over the years. I moved back to London. I've seen, how the London scene works. I've managed to have some incredible experiences. But along the way, it's definitely been an incredible journey, to be honest. Obviously ups and downs, but it's not full time for me. I work in investment banking. Well, I wouldn't say on the side. I work in investment banking. I do this on the side. But yeah, I would love to move into the creative world full time, and do a lot more, like be more than just menswear blogging and stuff like that. It would definitely be style consulting and work with brands, potentially coming up with my own brand. So yeah, there's a lot of scope. I mean, and just to tie it in with what we're actually talking about today, personal branding plays such an important role in that, because when you go into the creative world and you're a freelancer, you are literally everything about you. Your neck is on the line, right? Bonnie, as you mentioned, when you go to events, people are buying into you. They want you to be there, right? You can't really have an off day. Even if you have had an off day, you've got to turn it on and really bring your A game. So you're always on show, whether you like it or not. And it doesn't have to be in terms of a scary factor. It could be a very, very beautiful factor, really, because it gives you a platform to shine, right? Whereas a lot of people, lack that platform to shine. But I think from my perspective, I've had some great experiences and learned a lot, like in terms of how to be in certain places and certain times. So yeah, that's a long story of this.
Thanks. And what about you, Bonnie? I mean, I'm imagining somewhat similar.
I actually had quite a different experience, I would say. So definitely not a full-time influencer in any way, though sometimes it does feel like a full-time job, especially given the significant following that I have on Twitter and on Instagram. For example, I had something that went viral on Twitter the other day and ended up with like 12,000 mentions, and I had to just turn it off for a couple of days because it was so crazy that I couldn't keep up with it. So for me, so background as a journalist, and I went to Twitter first because it's almost like the public square where you go out and say your thing. And I got on basically started to build a reputation for being able to condense big ideas down into sort of a pithy soundbite. And I used it as a vehicle to promote my journalism. So I had like 800 bylines like over the years of different things that I was writing, specialist subjects, columns. But what's really important there is I built a community around it. So it was, for me, it was more engaging with thought leaders, experts, other people, but also people who were very interested in the news. I've been there for over 10 years, and so it's really kind of evolved. And the flip side of that is I'm fairly well known here now from having been a face on the news. So there's a lot of scrutiny in terms of things that I say. So I have to be very, very careful to make sure that, what I say, I really stand by, because even if you delete your tweets, it's there forever. The flip side of that for me was, because Twitter was very much sort of professionally oriented, was that Instagram became the way to sort of humanize the personal brand. And it was where I kind of showed, I play guitar and I read lots of books, and these are my cats and this is my family. And it was almost rounding me out as a person. And I have very different audiences across the platforms. So I don't post a lot of the same content. But I have a very engaged audience on both sides. And what I've noticed now is, especially on Twitter, as the following there has grown, people have started to follow me on Instagram too, because they want more than the here's my thoughts on the news and here's my thoughts on this thing. They want to see, you know, what you look like when you don't have your makeup on, or what your morning routine is, and that sort of stuff too. So I almost see it as kind of like a supplementary thing. Still have to put the work in, you still have to be deliberate and intentional about the face that you present to the world. But because I almost have a strategy behind what I do, it doesn't take up all of my time now. So I don't saturate the grid. I'm quite intentional about how I use stories and things too. So, you know, taking the time to understand the platform and responding to what people want from you. So if something doesn't get a lot of engagement, like learn from it as well. So it does take a lot of work. It's not my full-time job. I wouldn't want it to be my full-time job, but it has given me so many career opportunities since, like, I made the transition from being a newspaper writer to doing radio documentaries to being a TV presenter, all because I was asked to do speaking engagements and things because of the brand that I'd cultivated on Twitter. So, you know, if you use it right, it can be like a force multiplier for your career, definitely.
I think that's really interesting, because you kind of made an example of what you've both said around the fact that having a surface level kind of brand is difficult, because then people buy into you, right? It's buying into you as a person. So they tend to feel connection. And the fact that you've got people coming from Twitter onto Instagram suggests that they want to get to know you more, because they're interested in you as a person. They're clearly bought into your professional work. But when we're talking on the professional side, there's probably a number of people here that are not intending to be influencers, right? But what do they need to think about when they're trying to consider a personal brand in, say, in the banking world, or in education, in something in the workplace? You know, what is the importance of a personal brand there, and what should they be considering in terms of building it up? Ronnie, you want to go with that first?
So if you are using your personal brand to point yourself in a direction specifically in terms of your career, I think the first thing that you can do is listen and learn instead of trying to create. So again, I would say build your community, find the people who are the thought leaders and watch what they do, watch how they interact, watch how they build community, look at the sorts of things that resonate with their audience, and take notes and think about how you can translate that to what you have to offer. Think about your expertise, but also think about your stretch goals, like think about where you want to go. So after you've done that and you've identified the platform, where your audience is, because that's really key too. If you are using it specifically in terms of trying to get ahead in perhaps the corporate world, it's different. There are different rules, and you have to make sure that everything you say will align you with the sorts of people that you want to work with, because the reality is these days is that people will look to your social media to see that if you are a good fit for their company. And I think for myself and for Gurj as well, I imagine there's probably an element of more sort of creativity, and that people will be a bit more forgiving in terms of us being more human, and still, you know, use human language, etc. But you have to be very, very intentional. What you could even do is, if there's a specific company, say, that you want to align yourself with, say Google, or say it is a bank or something, is read their corporate strategies. What are the sorts of things that matter to them? What are their mission? What's their vision? What are their values? And craft content towards that. So it's always about being strategic, doing the discovery and doing the work. Follow the people who follow the people that you're interested in, you know, and build community that way. And then start responding and engaging with content before you're creating your own, so that you become a known voice, you become a known face. And then once you've established yourself in that sort of milieu, when you start creating, people will listen. Because if you just go out cold, you create a profile and you're like, I've got this really important thing to say on this subject, and nobody knows who you are. You've not engaged in any way, you've not built that community, nobody will listen to you. So align yourself with the people that you aspire to work with, and the industry norms, I would say, as well, and then develop a unique voice in that space.
I think that's incredible advice. I mean, Gurj, do you have anything to add, or a different perspective?
I mean, she's covered everything, really. But I totally agree, right? I think I really love the point about, you know, listening. I think listening is such a key thing with personal branding. Like, how, if you're just moving into the corporate world for the first time, how are you supposed to know what the corporate world is if you haven't experienced it? And the only way to really do that, or to experience it, is to listen, to really be receptive and conscious of what the things are going around you. And I totally agree. I think you need to be a good listener. You need to be someone that's good at building up a knowledge set, right? You don't have to, we see it nowadays. People aren't exactly experts in, some things, and they're sitting on top of the world. But what they have done is what Bond mentioned is very strategic, right? Knowing who's who, right? Knowing who's who is just as important as what you know in an organization, especially the size of, big companies, for example. So I would tell people to really do their homework, really try to understand who are the voices of the industry, who are the voices of the firm, right? And especially, taking it back to what I do in the menswear space, I completely resonate with what Ronnie mentioned about, before you start speaking, really listen, really see who's who in that space, because I approach that world from an outside-in perspective. And so there are people there who have lived, breathed everything, all things menswear. Things that, before I was even born, they were deciding the cloth that men would wear in Marks and Spencer's, for example, right? These are people who've got a wealth of knowledge. And you really need to listen to them, really need to build your knowledge and ask them questions. And I think being inquisitive, being kind of open-minded, and then doing that exercise of building to your strengths. What do people want to see? How do I move forward? Who are the people? Who are the decision makers in certain things? And really aligning to that philosophy. But in doing so, not losing yourself in that, right? Really aligning to that philosophy, but then weeding out the things that you mostly connect with that person with, or that particular thing with. So it is very strategic. It is about playing to your strengths. It is about in silence working on some of the weaknesses or things that you're not really sure on. But it's all about the strategic element of that. It's all about the listening element, the strategic element, and really building out things which a lot of the real big decision makers are actually talking about.
Yeah.
And I would circle back to the point that you made earlier there about the fact that it's a discovery and it's not an end point. Like, you're not going to have a fully formed personal brand as soon as you start. It takes work, it takes intentionality, and it will evolve over time, because as you begin to develop confidence in your own voice, as you begin to develop not only knowledge but specialism, expertise, like your one big thing, that will necessarily reshape and reface your brand. It will evolve. It doesn't matter how much cribbing that you do, doesn't matter how much time and effort you put into setting your profiles up. It's a journey, and you have to be willing to do the work over time, and not assume that if you're not getting results immediately, that you're not seeing that big following. You have to create even when you don't want to create. You have to create even when you haven't got an audience, when you've got an audience of one. You have to keep doing it, because it's more about consistency over time than it is about doing one big thing that suddenly goes viral and sends everyone your way.
Yes, slow and steady wins the race, right? And I think anyone on this platform should really be thinking about setting themselves up for the long term, for longevity. It's all good to go viral quickly, strategy to make money quickly. It's like there's no such thing as overnight things. It's work that's done over and over and over, repetition, good routines, consistency, authenticity, right? Pushing out quality stuff, storytelling around that quality stuff. And like you mentioned, there might just be one person. Just because someone's not looking today, there's going to be someone. You're going to get to a point where a lot of people will be looking, right? And you might not be ready for those people to be looking, right? But if you're doing it day in, day out, if you live, breathe everything that you do, it is what you do. That is exactly it. Turning up to certain events to create content. You basically are so comfortable with doing it and stretching yourself. It becomes the norm, and you have to make that the norm.
That's really, I think there's two things you've kind of both really raised there. One of the things you said, Gerd, was around the fact that there's a jack of all trades kind of concept. And our brand and community lead at TC Global, he said this to me before, that it's going away from being an expert in one or the jack of all trades to actually having to be both now. And so being really clever and adapting to that is really key. And again, with that one hit wonder kind of expectation, right? It's about being the Beyonce or being the one-hit wonder, right? So I think that's really key. We've got a question that's coming. I just want to put it to both of you. Let me know who wants to answer it first. What recommendations do you have for people that are just now coming onto platforms that have long passed their organic beta and are increasingly being dominated by experienced creators and companies participating in the career economy? And how do you figure the right volume of content you should be putting out there? So I think we'll leave the content to the side for now and just take that hefty, creator economy, okay, into the creator economy. So can we take that one first around how do you break into these markets now? How do you position yourself? Who wants to start on that one?
Oh my goodness. So
ladies first.
I think this is a really difficult one, especially for me, because my background has come from writing and that sort of content creation, whereas now I've watched the evolution over the last few years and my kids can do stuff on YouTube and TikTok that just frightens me. I once had to spend a day at the BBC learning how to TikTok, which as a woman in my 30s was quite humbling. Again, I think what you need to do is take a step back, and it's about quality and about your specialism. And if you start to do that, eventually all these fads will kind of like move on to the next thing. So what becomes very clear for people who are interested in what you're doing is what is artifice, what are shiny transitions in YouTube videos, and what is really, really quality content. So if you put the time and the effort and the work in to establish your voice and establish that community, again, it comes back to that bit about doing the work first. You've got to do the legwork in terms of connecting with the really important people in your community, because they're almost going to be a force multiplier. If you can get a thought leader, if you can get someone who you've engaged with lots to share your work, who sees the value in it, then that's social proof, and that is almost the sort of thing that will send people your way. So it's not about just going in and suddenly thinking about making really shiny videos or like really slick TikToks or anything like that. It is really about establishing those relationships first and foremost. So comment on things, ask questions, try and use other people's content as a jumping off point for thoughtful discussion. And then once you do that, they have bought into you and to your questions, and you can even approach people and say, hey, I really, I love what you do. Could you share this, etc. After you've built a relationship, you can't just go into someone cold. Like it drives me crazy when I get DMs every single day saying, can you retweet this? Can you share this? And it's like, I have no idea who you are. I don't know anything about you or whether, you're a good person or I can promote this. Whereas if it's someone who has been asking questions and engaging with my work, then I'll do it. And again, it's build the relationships and create quality content. If you build the relationships, then people will want to look at your quality content. That's the only way that I think that you can really set yourself apart. Yeah, you need to have the skills in terms of being able to do whatever the platform's norms are well. Relationships, it's the same in real life. It's build the community, make those key relationships, and then leverage those to your advantage.
Interesting, because what you're saying is engaging in the community essentially helps you build your personal brand, even if you're not in the community level yet, right? Like you're not at that same level. What about you, Glenn? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think Vonnie's really set the foundation well there in terms of back to what you mentioned about really building that community, really being a student of that community first before you try to. I think a lot of people rush to the idea that they have to be an expert in something straight away. And what I've noticed as well, especially in I guess let's talk about Instagram, for example. When new people are coming in, they'll DM you, how can I build this? How can I? And it's quite hard to tell them that this has been something that's been cultivated over 6 years, not 6 days. What I would add to that is don't just churn out content, right? It's all about quality, and more than quality is about storytelling behind that, right? If you're starting out, say why. Like, why are you actually doing this? Like, it's all good posting, for example, it's all good posting shots where you've traveled to, but really bring out some of the stories from those shots, right? Like, what is it about this place that people should visit? Why they should visit? What is it about the food there? What is it about the culture? What is it about that, right? But like you mentioned, Vonnie, it's all about doing it with intent, right? obviously there's great content, but you need to do it with intent. So yeah, the content itself, it should look great. You know, it should really feel great. It should be well received. But I think sometimes the storytelling is missing in all of that. And I'm not telling you to do captions of War and Peace. I'm not saying that. But when someone comes onto your feed or someone comes onto your Twitter, they should know exactly what you're about by just looking at the general feel of what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And that does come over time. That doesn't happen with you saying, right, I'm going to go dive in and do this, this, and this. And it is about kind of understanding not the rules, but what actually works for people, right? Obviously, menswear, women's wear, for example, going back to that, you know, menswear has a lot of rules. Some people say it's stupidly stuffy. Some people say it's a thing of the past. You know, people wear shirts under a roll neck and the collar's turned up where you could just see a point of the shirt. What's the point, right? But at the same time, it's not a trend, but it's quite a classic. It's a nod to a certain part of history in the 70s and 80s, for example. And it's about knowing that, right? It's also just doing it, taking a picture of it. But if you know some of that, and whether you appreciate it, whether it's right or wrong, that doesn't matter. But the fact that you can have a conversation about that and explain the thought process behind that, that is far more of a different level up to just creating trends and doing a copycat culture, in my opinion. Of course, we all get inspired in different ways and get influenced in different ways, but it's all about staying quite central to the storytelling of who you are. People should be able to come onto there and say, right, this person knows what they're talking about. I want to follow this person. I want to follow their journey because this will help enhance my own life.
You've used such an important word there, and I'm so glad that you did, in that it's story. And what you have to think here is human beings are wired for story. Yeah. Think about in the sort of pre-text world, before people were writing stuff down, they told stories, there was oral tradition. Human beings are wired for story. It's what they remember. Like, I remember one example that I was given was like, if, say, for example, someone came into you to talk to you about Subway sandwiches, and they were like, you know, they've got 2 grams of fat and blah, 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 and just walked into you and told you that code, you'd be like, that's really bizarre. Yeah. Why are you telling me this? Like, oh, this guy lost all of this weight by eating just Subway sandwiches for like a year. Oh, okay, that's interesting, because you've given the same information, but you've told it in a story, and that's what people connect to. So actually learning to craft a story is really, really important, but also learn to craft your story. And I think a good way that you can also think about it, because I love a framework and a tool, is like the hero's journey. And I'm sure lots of us are familiar with that from, you know, reading fiction and watching movies. You know, think about what's called you to what you're doing. What's the thing that brought you here? Who's mentored you? Who's inspired you? What have you overcome to get to this point? What problems have you solved? What makes you passionate about what you're doing and what keeps you doing it? And thinking about those things will help you learn to not only craft your own story, but tell the stories about the things that matter. So like you're saying there, like the menswear stuff is, you know, it's fascinating. Giving a bit of history, a bit of context for the picture is so important, because again, it comes back to what I said at the very beginning. It's adding value, and that could just be you've taught someone something today, and when they see someone in future doing that thing, they'll be like, oh, I know what that is. But they'll also think about the person who told them that, who taught them that in the first place, which will reinforce your brand, because will become top of mind. So if you take the opportunity to teach people, when they encounter that thing in the real world, they will think about you and then come back to you. Yeah. So it's story is so key to all of this.
Thank you. I think I'm learning lots from this myself. It looks like there's a lot of engaging content going on the side in the chat as well. I mean, kind of linked to what Sean had asked, but can there be such a thing as overdoing it? Like, where's that happy medium in terms of, you know, producing that content and making sure that it's absorbed in a way that is meaningful? Guy, do you want to go with that one first?
Yeah, I will actually, because I think I found myself when I'm doing a lot, it just feels like a job. It feels almost wrong. Yeah. So I think there is a thing as overdoing it. I think you can unwind things while just being on there, plugging things all the time. And I think when you do that, you move away from that storytelling piece. You move away from the quality. And obviously it all depends on your workload and how many brands you got to work with and certain things. But it's then putting it tastefully in the calendar to make sure it's still hard hitting enough for people to digest that, to appreciate that, to learn from that, or be inspired by that, right? So to the natural point, I definitely think there's something that's overdoing it, especially in a time like this, because it's almost like it's a weird one, right? It's quite contradictory. We are moving so fast, we are consuming so fast, right? But I feel like it's up to the creator to kind of bring that back, slow that down a little bit. And I guess my angle on things, what I do, and which I kind of explained a few days ago, Jazz, was it was all about the slowness of life, right? I really appreciate things that are well made, which stand the test of time, traveling slower, spending an extra day in a hotel to really understand that area, just to chill out and not be like 100 miles per hour. And I think with that line, I think I'd also do a bit more slowness in my content, right? Rather than posting every single day, for example, I really try to stretch it out a little bit, just because I think audiences will just feel like, oh, this face again, or this face again. And so when I want to pop up, I want to make sure that it's like nice stuff, it's things that people really do appreciate, rather than going over the top. There will be times when you'll be busier than normal. It's all about how you plan that, right? So you have to be a super organizer as well.
Yeah, I think that's super key, to be organized. But Bonnie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo what you're saying there about oversaturating not only your own feeds, but what you have to remember here is that there's etiquette for these platforms. And your feed looks one way, but your posts appear alongside everyone else's. If you post lots of things in quick succession, it looks like it almost looks selfish, like you're taking up too much of people's time and space. They want to see a range of things when they're going through their feeds. And then if it's you, oh, and then it's you again, and then it's another person, and then it's you, and then it's you. It implies that you don't value their time. It almost becomes like broadcasting. It's like, here's what I reckon, and it's really important that you hear what I have to say. And that turns people off to your content. I think posting quality content, taking the time to plan it out, to be deliberate about it, and actually to have the confidence to space it out, because I know that when you're starting on a platform and you don't have a lot on your feeds, and the impulse when there isn't a lot happening is to just create. But actually, so in terms of content, yeah, I would favor quality rather than quantity. Definitely, I very much believe in the sort of the slow movement side of things, that like taking that time to appreciate. And I think actually that translates to taking the time to appreciate and value your audience's time and attention, and to not demand too much of it at any one point. And if you are crafting story and high quality content, one, you're not going to be able to do lots of that. And also, you're not going to expect them to engage with lots of posts of that nature in quick succession. The other aspect of overdoing it, I think, is in terms of the aesthetic. And that, again, comes back to things being very surface level, is I see so many people on Instagram now, and I can't tell who's created what, because they've bought filters from other people, or they've copied the poses or the aesthetic. And it almost becomes like a meme. People are they're taking the same pictures in the same places, and that's overdoing it in its own way too. You have to develop your own look and feel and tone of voice on every platform, and that takes a bit of bravery to do that, to be willing to do your own thing. So I would say, think about the quality of your content rather than the quantity. But also don't be tempted to just copy what other people are doing in terms of how they post and what their posts look like as well.
Yeah, I just want to add one little bit to that, is that be consistent, but don't be overly consistent, right? There is a beauty in being a little bit free thinking, free flowing, and that is what personal branding. You can stage as much as you want, but the bottom line is that personal branding is all about when you are your best self, and that comes with intuition and all the experience that you've built up over the years. And so when you do come to presenting something, or when you are on stage, it comes naturally, right? So be consistent with the content, quality, everything. Quality should always be there, but don't be overly consistent where you're rehearsed, where you're so rehearsed. People miss the personality side of things.
Yeah, it comes back to being human, doesn't it? And human beings are not their Instagram feeds, and actually having a post every now and again where it's something a little bit different, that's that really important humanizing factor of your brand that will allow people to connect to you. And so, for example, say on Instagram or Twitter, like sometimes I'll talk about mental health or other things like that, and people actually really engage with that too, because it's like, oh, you're a human being as well. Like, I really like what you do, but you're a human being. I'm not talking about oversharing, but every now and again to just, give a bit of real talk rather than a reflection of what's your brand. And I think that's really important too, because people become blind to just seeing the same thing over and over and over again. So actually being able to just is really important too.
That's really interesting, because I think the question that Gyas has asked, you've kind of already answered in what you both just said, is do you think, although a personal brand means consistency of values and vibe, your true audience also evolves with you over time? Like people did once with celebrities, and I think essentially your answers are both yes, right? You gain more of an audience, but you're also having the other one follow you through because they're invested with you. As you said, they're pretty engaged.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that it changes over time. So like the people that follow me from day one, they probably left me because I've evolved, I've changed my scope, I've changed certain things. But coming towards just talking about a little bit about platform, Instagram stories, for example, that gave people the 360, right? Because normally you just have a feed, but all of a sudden people can see what I'm doing. People can see that I'm at this event. People can see I'm going to shoot. People can see I'm not exactly 100% today, right? And that's a closeness. That brings a closeness to that person. And you don't really know where people are, right? When people are looking at your page, they're looking at your page for different reasons. It might not be anything to do with menswear. It might just be that, oh, there's someone that's confident enough to go and do something like this. They might be completely interested in something completely different, but they like what's going on here, So I think and I think I mentioned this the other day, you're rarely very mindful of who's watching, right? And that's not in a bad way, because I don't mean, it's a big brother thing, but I think you need to be a bit more mindful about that. You are potentially, being very influential on certain people. And that influence stems from, from just wearing a new tie to, I love this confidence, this is giving me confidence to go out there to live my dreams and build my branding. So I think it is like, there is an evolution to not just yourself and your journey, but the audience that you capture with it as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I don't know if Ronnie's having some audio issues, maybe.
Hand up to
Yes.
Okay, I think she'll pop back in a minute.
Okay.
But Gurj, maybe you can answer this in the meantime. And I have one question linked to stuff you said earlier, but Sean's question is kind of burning on the side. What platform do you enjoy, or platforms do you enjoy? Hi, Ronnie, can you hear us? Okay, I'll let her jump on in a sec. What platforms do you enjoy most for your content? But also, where do you see the people you're connecting with, or the community that you want to be part of, and their attention shifting in the next 5 years?
So I think from my perspective, Instagram is still the big one, especially with more recently with some of the things the new tools that Instagram has raised, right? They're almost like for any other platform. We saw Snapchat, Instagram stories, Snapchat's been killed, right? We saw TikTok, and then we saw Instagram do reels. So, and now, I don't know if people have noticed, but in the last week or so, Instagram has introduced guides. So essentially, guides is essentially a short form of blogs, a blog post, right? So where we would go on to Condé Nast, for example, or the traveler.com and look at the 10 best places to travel in 2021, we've got a blogger who's already done that for you with pictures and explanation. So for me, I mean, social media is one of the things we don't really know what's going to happen in 5 years, right? But as it stands, Instagram is still very much at the heart of everything we do, and it still is the platform, right? We've got a lot of, so from my perspective, there's a lot of people who are all sorts of ages, young, old, prominent or not in the industry, who are all using that platform. And if anything, the older guys are using it a lot more now because they understand the power of the connection with it. and like I mentioned, in terms of with these platforms, Instagram is still the one, but you also got to consider that it's the one for very good reasons, right? People are just generally, I would like to think, reluctant to start a new account somewhere else because it's starting from scratch, right? Whereas Instagram, for example, is all encompassing. So you're building one kind of following for everyone to see the stories, everyone to see the reels, everyone to see the guides, right? So there is a sense of convenience in it all, right? So I think that is the one to stay. And more than anything is that the platform is a super connector, right? You need to understand that. I think TikTok is very much about watching videos and having a laugh and then coming off it. I think whereas, and so is Twitter a little bit. Twitter is all about getting your news feeds, getting that, you know, the 150 odd characters, whatever it is, and seeing what's going on in a certain niche of industry, for example. Whereas Instagram is a super connector. You got you can comment on your picture, you could comment on others, you can ask them questions on that, you could DM them. So it's very much a community, you know, conversation. And in doing so, I've met a lot of people in London off the back of that. I've got to, you know, what we mentioned earlier, where there is an opportunity to fast track your personal branding, to fast track networking, which you couldn't do before. You will never get FaceTime with certain people in the industry that you can potentially get FaceTime with now. So I think that's hugely powerful. But yeah, I think Instagram is still very much at the heart of social media and platforms.
I mean, Vonnie, can you hear us now?
I can hear you. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. Everything just stopped. So I'm sure you've been having a really insightful conversation that I've missed all about for the last 5 minutes.
Well, we're just talking about the platforms that you enjoy engaging with most, and which ones you see being there in 5 years' time. And I know we need to wrap up shortly, but I know you mentioned Twitter and you use it in a professional sphere. Now, how do you see that against LinkedIn and how people can utilize them both together, differently, separately, or one over the other? What are your thoughts there?
So I think LinkedIn is very different in terms of it being far more of a closed loop. And that is the place where I think you really need to be aligning yourself specifically in terms of the people that you would like to see yourself working with. And it comes back to that thing that I was saying earlier. Even if you are not using, say, Twitter or Instagram in the sort of super professional sense, and you've managed to build a following, if you're going to really make it professional and put that effort into making sure you're aligning with the sorts of people that you want to work for, LinkedIn is the place to do it. What I would also say is active maintenance is really, really important on LinkedIn. Don't just update your CV every now and again. What you need to show employers when they're looking at that is that you are willing to grow and that you're learning new things. So I love to do things on like Future Learn and other things to gain almost like micro credentials and new skills, and being able to use LinkedIn as a dynamic space to show how you're learning, and the fact that you're the sort of person who will who's not just coming in and who will be static, someone who's constantly interested and curious about the world and about gaining new skills. Also, again, I would say finding the thought leaders in terms of your industry and engaging and reaching out and making connections. I think that's far more the sort of place where you can approach people cold, because it's almost like professional networking in that way. Also, if you are creating content that is of high quality and of value, that you can share it there as well. I mean, you should never just cross post. You should always tweak what you're doing for the norms of that particular platform. But I would say, again, stepping back from social media. So for example, I have a website as well, and that's something that I maintain, and that is the space where I write longer form articles or where I link to things that I've had published. And actually, that's a really good thing to have to support your LinkedIn as well. So you're not just like linking to a post on another social media platform, somewhere where it's like you have a blog or your website. That again, it's supplemental and it supports what you're doing there. I think it's really, really important, and it comes back to what I said at the beginning about being platform agnostic. You can't tie yourself to a specific platform forever, which is why you have to understand your niche and your values, and a little bit about content strategy too, because you have to be ready to move to the next thing where your audience is, not immediately. I think I would caution against sort of everyone sort of the mass exodus towards TikTok or mass exodus towards something else. I think these things have to prove themselves over time. So actually something like a website is actually a really valuable thing to invest in doing, because that will be there. That's been a norm of the internet for a very long time, and having that as the background to what you do in social media, I think is a really valuable thing. And I don't think there's enough emphasis on that, especially if you are trying to establish yourself as a professional. And again, to sort of put my web and content head on as well, like you can be really far more intentional around things like an SEO strategy that means that you are appearing in Google, because Twitter, you know, having a tweet pull through for you is less valuable than having the here's what I do and here's what I'm really good at that a website would offer. So I would say take the time to invest in that as well. And yeah, actively maintain your LinkedIn profile. Like I have a folder in Outlook, whereas if I've done something that I'm really proud of, you know, I make notes, and then every now and again I review the notes and then add them and enrich what I'm doing. So it's constant work, and again, be intentional.
Yeah, I think that's what people might lose sight of, right? Like what you've said is be consistent, but I think that consistency, I mean, Gerd, you said don't be too consistent, right? But the consistency you're probably talking about on the other side is being consistent with your own activities, in terms of you making sure that you're constantly evolving yourself to put yourself in the best possible position. So I know we're going to run out of time. I just got 2 more questions for you. One is kind of touching on what you mentioned as part of that is, Ronnie, is a normal CV, right? It's hard enough to stand out when there's a piece of paper, double-sided, telling everybody about your life. Is that enough anymore? And what can people do to enrich that? Ronnie, if you want to start on that one, and Gerd, you chip in.
So I'm going to come at this from both sides. So in my professional life, outside of Twitter and Instagram, so I've got quite a senior role and I do a lot of recruiting and have done over time. A CV is so static that that's why you need things like your website and your LinkedIn to bring life and to bring color to that. Another thing that has become a norm right now as well, and again, I don't want to advise people to adopt a fad, but more people are doing like video CVs, which gives you like a quick information hit. And as people are becoming more used to watching things like videos online, we know that that's the type of people are consuming more video than anything else. Having something like that as well as your CV. So like I have a link in my CV that is like 30 seconds. Here's what I am, here's what I do, here's how I can make that work for you. And it's not just me talking, you know, you can do these sorts of things with various different tools online for free, and you can add some music to it and you can make it nice. And having that as well, I think is really important. But again, it comes back to the, not just having the piece of paper that shows what you do, showing who you are, because that people will search for you. They're not supposed to, but HR departments will Google you. Will find you, so you want to make sure that what they find supports what you're saying in your CV. And again, it comes back to intentionalities. Make sure that you're not undermining what you said in your CV by posting something that is really, really, you know, not in line with the values of the company that you're trying to hire for. What I would also say there as well is, if you are sending your CV to people, audit your social media feeds. Like, go through it, make sure that there's nothing on it that will be a red flag for a recruiter. All of this, everything that we've talked about today comes back to intentionality and doing the work. All of this takes time and it takes effort. Make sure you're blocking out time to do it. None of this is magic. None of us get ahead in our careers or build a following just by accident. It happens because you've taken the time to do it. And so little things like that, like making sure that when you update your CV to go for a job, you are auditing what is online for people to find when they inevitably search for you, as they always will.
I think just as part of that, I mean, kind of having that second layer supports some of those soft skills, which are increasingly becoming necessary. You know, the UN said that the top skill gap in the next 5 years will be things, number one, empathy. Like, that's a skills gap, which is crazy because we're humans. That's a natural thing that we should show, but it's become increasingly difficult for us to demonstrate that. So, Gerd, how would you suggest people concentrate on focusing on, you know, showcasing those soft skills through whether it's social media or just their personal brand in general?
Yeah, it's very important, right? And I think it touches on the whole CV thing, because in a CV, it's almost like a baselining exercise, right? It's a consistency exercise where everyone gets an equal opportunity to kind of present themselves, and it's the fastest way to process something, right?
Yeah.
But I think with stuff like softer skills, it's always that's what gives you the extra edge, right? That is what helps build that personal brand, and what really puts color into who you are. And it's a bit like Formula One, right? We take Formula One, for example, right? It's a sport, but teams are doing everything in their power, geared so much towards getting that extra millimeter of advantage, competitive advantage to someone else. And I'm not saying let's make some big competition, but what I'm saying is the softer skills are generally often overlooked, but the power of them in a world now where empathy, where charisma, where all of these things play such a huge part, you shouldn't overlook those at all. It's all of, yeah, of course, knowledge set, a good skill set, having expertise in something is very important. But I've seen a lot of, for example, I've got some friends who I know in the menswear scene have got a lot further because of, you know, these softer skills, a lot more empathy, a lot more understanding, and a good dynamic way of connecting with people. Would I say they're more skilled than some other people? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I think that's probably their more focus point, that they've got to build these skills now to really back up the talk, per se, right? But I think stuff like softer skills are so important when you have people who are academically very much, you know, similar or aligned, right? The extra edge now, I think, comes from softer skills, having that empathy, having the ability to actually listen, having the ability to be a bit more creative, and not being afraid to be a bit different. And I think this is where it's becoming a little bit more acceptable, a little bit more, you know, receptive, that people can be different. You can go now into an investment banking interview and be a bit more dynamic, be a bit more creative. Whereas before it was like, you know, which systems you know, how do you know the data travels, all this sort of stuff. Personality is so important, and I think the bottom line is, and I think it will always be in some respects, people buy people, right? We people buy people. Fine. I mean, we're not talking about Apple per se, because we all love an iPhone or a MacBook, but even with Apple, for example, we're not buying the machine. We're not buying that. We're buying the feeling. We're buying the lifestyle it gives us, right? And that may be a bit, you know, surface level, but in some ways it really isn't, because, you know, when you get intertwined with Apple software, it's your lifestyle has been created for you, and then that is the most important thing to understand, right? When you understand that people will buy people, you then understand the power of investing in your softer skills. And how that could give you an edge in today's world, because you know, a lot more people are getting that education, whereas that before, that wasn't really, you know, as important. Before there was a gap, whereas now that gap is closing, so you need to create something, an advantage somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you've made a really important point there about how saturated the market's becoming. Now more and more people are educated, and that's a wonderful thing. But what that means is blindness when you're looking at CVs, because you're like, this person's really qualified, this person's really qualified. And it makes it very, very difficult as a recruiter as well to like whittle them down. And it's really in the interviews that you see those soft skills come into play. And soft skills are, you know, it's not what you can do, it's often the how you can do it. So you said empathy there. And again, that's, I think, the most important soft skill that you could possibly have. It's great for building your personal brand online because you're listening to people and you're putting yourself in their shoes. But even for me, like in my day job as like as a web and content professional who's devising strategy for university, understanding what people want from us is so important, but also being able to hear them when they're saying we're not giving them what they want. And also that will help you when you inevitably find yourselves in sticky situations in your career. Like empathy will absolutely be something that you can rely on and that recruiters value. The other thing I would say is emotional intelligence, is being willing to ask for help. Like a lot of people are afraid, especially when they're starting out in their careers and or starting out to build a brand online, of looking like they don't know everything. And actually, again, this is being a human being. You don't know everything all the time. You're being able to be gracious and ask for help. that actually says a lot more about you as a person. You know, listen to your experts and what your audience is saying and draw insights from that. Showing growth over time is actually really powerful and inspires people. So actually being able to hold your hands up and say, got that wrong, and here's what I've learned from it, that's again is valuable, and employers would rather have that. You know, they would rather have someone who has that emotional intelligence. The other soft skill I think is really important is like self and situational awareness as well, and that maps not only to the online space but also to when you're in your career as well. It's like you can do enormous damage by saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. So always think about what's the best thing to do or say, and how best you can support others in the current context, whether that is online or whether that is you in your career. Soft skills are so important, and understanding what those are and what's most important to you in terms of how you are in the world, not only what you are and what your skills are, that will get you so much further, and it will give you the edge. You know, you're not just the person with the list of degrees or skills or things that you've done over time. That how you do things, and that is the thing that will shine and set you apart from everybody else.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, thank you so much. I think we've kind of way run over time, but there was so much content in the conversation. I think both of you raised points around being authentic, being consistent in the work and the research you're putting in, building up your network and connecting with your community by engaging with them. All those kind of points I think are super key and a lot to take away for our audience. But before I say bye to you, I know everyone will ask, so if you could just share a platform and handle that people might want to connect with you on, that would be really great. Ronnie, if you go first.
Twitter is probably the place where you'll find me most often. So you can find me there at Vonnie Bravo. So it's VONNY_BRAVO. And from there, you'll find a link to Instagram if you're interested in, my cats and what I do in the morning. And all of that sort of stuff too.
Thank you. And Gaj?
So I think Instagram is probably the platform, and then you could go through to other platforms from there. But on Instagram, it is Singh Gentry, so SINGHGENTRY. So hopefully see you soon.
Thank you so much. You've provided so much value, and I can see that loads of people have engaged with it, and we really appreciate you sharing some of your insights. Thank you guys. Thanks for everyone that joined us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.